Good morning. This is your daily briefing from the New York Times. Today's headlines for Saturday, August 8, 2026. I'm your host, and we have a packed edition today, from regime maneuvering in Cuba and a narrow Senate confirmation for the new Attorney General, to Ukrainian strikes on Russia's richest woman's business empire, a crackdown on student protesters in New Delhi, and the long-deferred hopes of Chagos Islanders caught in the crosscurrents of a widening Middle East war. We'll also cover a dueling naked bike ride in Portland, a controversial deportation of Mexican nationals despite torture risks, a grim discovery in a Chicago funeral home, and the ongoing political survival fight of Ohio Congressman Max Miller. Plus, a former Marine's deteriorating condition in Russian detention, Iranian disillusionment with Trump's promises, a renewed White House bid to oust a Federal Reserve governor, the latest jobs and inflation calculus, Netflix's billboard stunt on Sunset Boulevard, Haitian city workers losing their jobs, New York City reading scores sliding backward, a lawsuit over a second home tax, streaming picks, Edinburgh Fringe buzz, new movie reviews, a metafictional novel about family shipwrecks and murder, books for wimpy kid fans, summer desserts, a puzzling parasite, Tuscan vineyard dinners, African safari planning, a colorful playroom and Rio real estate, Justin Trudeau's boyfriend rebrand, 3 notable obituaries, magazine essays on cosmetic surgery, energy infrastructure in modern war, and Anthony Bourdain's legacy, and a full slate of opinion pieces. Let's begin. We start with Cuba, where the Trump administration is pursuing what officials describe as more regime alteration than regime change. According to reporting by Tyler Pager, Julian Barnes, and Francis Robles, U.S. intelligence agencies have been pressed to identify a current or former Cuban official who could be persuaded to take over the government in Havana as the United States ratchets up its pressure campaign. The model, some officials say, is Delcy Rodriguez, who became Venezuela's interim president after U.S. forces captured the previous leader, Nicolas Maduro. But the search carries a warning. Some officials caution that a more hardline leader could emerge if the administration moves forward with its plans, potentially hardening the regime rather than softening it. The effort reflects a broader strategy of squeezing Cuba economically and diplomatically while quietly scouting for a successor, a delicate operation with no guarantee of success, and with the ever-present risk of unintended consequences in a region where U.S. interventions have a long and complicated history. From Havana we turn to Washington, where the Senate narrowly confirmed Todd Blanche as Attorney General on Saturday, elevating President Trump's former defense lawyer to lead a Justice Department that has, in the words of reporters Michael Gold, Glenn Thrush, and Carl Hulse, ceded much of its independence to the White House. Blanche, who had been serving as acting Attorney General since April after Pam Bondi was fired, faced a bruising confirmation battle centered on concerns about his ability and willingness to rein in the president. The key vote came from Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy, who, despite reservations, announced he would back Blanche, giving Republicans just enough votes for a majority. Cassidy's decision salvaged the nomination after weeks of uncertainty. The confirmation caps a months-long transition at the department's helm and underscores the extent to which the Senate GOP has coalesced around Trump's picks, even when those picks raise institutional alarms among some in their own ranks. Also on Capitol Hill, Democratic leader Chuck Schumer found himself once again reaching out to a newly minted Senate nominee who had openly opposed keeping him as party leader. Carl Hulse reports that for the third time this election season, Schumer had to make common cause with a candidate who ran against his preferred choice. This time it was Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who triumphed in Michigan's Democratic primary over Schumer's favored candidate after a campaign that cast the Democratic leader as part of the problem with Washington. During a phone call Wednesday, Schumer was eager to look past the divide. "I said to him, I don't need you to like me," Schumer reportedly told El-Sayed, "I just need you to win." The exchange captures the pragmatic, if sometimes awkward, dance of party unity in a cycle where establishment figures face insurgent challengers across the map and where the path to a Senate majority runs through races like Michigan's, where El-Sayed now faces a tough general election. Now to the world stage, and to Russia, where the country's richest woman is watching her business empire go up in flames, literally. Tatiana Kim, the billionaire co-founder of Wildberries, Russia's answer to Amazon, has navigated wartime Kremlin politics and outmaneuvered her ex-husband, the father of her 7 children, in a rancorous business feud that involved a deadly shooting near Red Square. But as Natalia Vasilyeva, Paul San, Alina Lobzina, and Oleg Matsnev report, Ukrainian airstrikes are now decimating Wildberries warehouses and threatening the company's survival. After months of attacks on Russian oil refineries that caused significant economic damage, Ukraine has expanded its targeting to include logistics and e-commerce infrastructure critical to Russia's domestic supply chains. For Kim, who built Wildberries from a small clothing resale business into a sprawling marketplace, the strikes represent an existential challenge, one that no amount of political savvy or legal maneuvering can easily deflect. The Kremlin's willingness to protect her assets will be tested against the military reality of a war that has brought destruction deep into Russian territory. From Russia's commercial heartland to the streets of New Delhi, where a New York Times analysis by Anuprita Das, Shokat Nanda, and Jiawei Wang details the July 20 crackdown on thousands of unarmed students marching toward the Indian Parliament building in a rare challenge to the government. Officials had blocked internet in the area, initially slowing the emergence of details. But videos taken by protesters and witnesses began circulating, revealing that security forces beat people with sticks and fired tear gas and pellet guns at them. The analysis, which verified and analyzed images and video footage from the scene and spoke to protesters, has provoked public outrage and accusations of excessive force. The march was organized by youth groups demanding action on unemployment, education, and democratic freedoms, issues that have simmered for years but rarely brought such large numbers of students into direct confrontation with the state. The government's response, captured in shaky smartphone footage and now dissected frame by frame, has become a flashpoint in a broader debate about dissent, policing, and the space for protest in the world's largest democracy. Half a world away, in the middle of the Indian Ocean, the inhabitants of the Chagos Islands were expelled by the British 60 years ago to make way for a joint British and American military base. This year, refugees were anxious to return, their hopes caught in a morass of geopolitics that took a sudden, violent turn when the US bombed Iran. John Elligan, reporting from Port Louis, Mauritius, with photographs by Joao Silva, tells the story of Rosaline Rabouin, who was 8 when British soldiers showed up at her family's home and told them they had to leave. She and roughly 2,000 others were sent on an 8-day journey to Mauritius, never allowed to return. "If they told me I could return, I would go today," she says, sitting in the Mauritian capital nearly 6 decades later. The Chagosians' long legal battle for the right to return had gained momentum, with the UK signaling willingness to negotiate sovereignty over the islands. But the outbreak of war between the US and Iran and the strategic value of the Diego Garcia base at the center of the Chagos archipelago has frozen those talks. The base is now a critical node in US operations in the Middle East, and neither Washington nor London appears willing to relinquish control or allow a civilian return that could complicate military access. For the Chagosians, the bombing of Iran was not a distant event, it was the sound of their homecoming being postponed once again, perhaps indefinitely. Back in the United States, a split among protest groups in Portland, Oregon, has led to dueling naked bike rides, 2 competing versions of the World Naked Bike Ride, which has been an annual tradition since 2004. Anna Griffin and Maureen O'Hagan, reporting fully clothed from Portland, with photographs by Jordan Gale, describe how when political times get tough for liberals, a certain segment of the city reaches for protest in perhaps its barest form. They take off their clothes, climb onto bicycles, and ride through the city. This summer, they're doing it twice. One ride bills itself as the original, a celebration of body positivity and cycling advocacy. The other, organized by a splinter group, frames itself as more explicitly political, a response to what they see as the co-optation of the event by corporate sponsors and city officials. The dueling rides have sparked debate within Portland's activist community. Does the party atmosphere dilute the message? Or does the spectacle itself, hundreds of nude cyclists streaming through neighborhoods, constitute a form of resistance, a reclaiming of public space that refuses to be polite? The question hangs in the summer air along with the smell of sunscreen and the sound of bicycle bells. A far grimmer story unfolds at the intersection of immigration enforcement and international law. Heimdall Aziz reports that the Trump administration in recent days deported a group of Mexican nationals who had been barred from removal to their home country after proving to an immigration court that they would likely face torture. Immigration and Customs Enforcement head David Venturella reversed the protections, citing diplomatic assurances received by the State Department from the government of Mexico that the deportees would not be harmed. The move used a rare authority to override what are known as withholding of removal protections, a legal safeguard grounded in the Convention Against Torture. 2 people with knowledge of the move spoke on condition of anonymity because of the sensitive nature of the plan. The deportation raises profound questions about the weight of diplomatic assurances versus the evidence that convinced immigration judges these individuals faced a genuine risk of torture, and about the administration's willingness to test the boundaries of legal protections for non-citizens. And in Chicago, a grim discovery: the bodies of more than 50 people were found decomposing in an unrefrigerated area of a South Side funeral home run by a couple who previously operated a crematory that was shut down over similar allegations. Mark Walker reports that Chicago police were called to help with a license investigation at the South Chicago Chapel Funeral Home on Thursday and found human remains inside. The Cook County Medical Examiner's Office said a team of investigators and forensic pathologists found the bodies in various states of decomposition. It was not clear how long they had been there. The couple who run the funeral home had previously operated a crematory that was closed by state regulators after inspectors found improperly stored remains. The case has reopened wounds for families who entrusted their loved ones to the business, and raised urgent questions about oversight of the funeral industry in Illinois. In politics, Ohio Republican Congressman Max Miller continues to resist pressure to drop his re-election bid as the deadline to withdraw nears. Emily Davies and Annie Carney report that Miller, accused of physically abusing his ex-wife and young daughter, including holding a gun to his ex-wife's head and fracturing their daughter's collarbone, planned to loan his campaign $1 million, effectively rebuffing calls from powerful Republicans in the state to withdraw. Senator John Husted, who faces his own tough re-election, has urged Miller to step aside. Miller has denied the accusations and requested that the House Ethics Committee open an investigation, though such inquiries rarely provide clarity quickly. The situation has become a test of the GOP's willingness to police its own members when allegations involve domestic violence rather than sexual misconduct, and of whether the party's institutional machinery will protect an incumbent or cut him loose for the sake of the seat. Meanwhile, the family of a former U.S. Marine detained in Russia says he is at risk of dying in custody. Isabella Kwai reports that Robert Gilman, 32, has been detained since 2022, when a Russian court in Voronezh convicted him of assaulting a police officer and sentenced him to 4.5 years in a penal colony. The sentence was extended to 10 years last year after authorities said Gilman assaulted prison staff and an investigator. Now, according to his family and the nonprofit advocacy group Global Reach, Gilman is being fed through a tube and is in a dissociative stupor in a civilian hospital. His family says he has been mistreated and they are afraid for his life. The case adds to a growing list of Americans held in Russian custody under circumstances that U.S. officials and advocates describe as arbitrary and politically motivated, a list that has only lengthened since the war in Ukraine began and U.S.-Russia relations plummeted. And in Iran, more than 5 months into the U.S. war, President Trump's promises to protesters have fallen by the wayside. Erica Green, Zolan Kanoyungs, Sanam Mahouzi, and Yagana Torbati report that in the weeks leading up to the conflict, Trump cheered on Iranian protesters rising up against their government, telling them to save the names of the killers and abusers and that he would come to their aid. Help is on its way, he promised. But as the war drags on, with no clear end in sight and the U.S. struggling to extricate itself, liberating the Iranian people has receded from the rhetoric. Iranians who once hoped for American support now say they feel abandoned. I was so wrong, one protester told The Times. The gap between the administration's early rhetoric and the grinding reality of a conflict that has devastated Iran's infrastructure, killed thousands, and destabilized the region has left a bitter residue not only among Iranians but among U.S. allies who questioned the war's objectives from the start. Turning to business, and the White House has opened a new front in its battle with Federal Reserve Governor Lisa D. Cook. Colby Smith and Maggie Haberman report that after the Supreme Court rebuffed the administration's first attempt to fire Cook last year, the White House sent her a letter on Wednesday saying it was considering removing her from her position. The letter, signed by White House Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino, gave Cook 21 days to respond to previous allegations that she had committed mortgage fraud, allegations Cook has denied and which have not resulted in charges. The move is widely seen as an attempt to pressure Cook, a Biden appointee whose term runs through 2038, into resigning, or to lay groundwork for a second removal attempt that the administration hopes will survive judicial scrutiny. It underscores the ongoing tension between presidential authority and the Fed's statutory independence, a tension that has escalated sharply under Trump. That independence is being tested on the economic front as well. Colby Smith reports that July's jobs report has reduced some of the urgency around the need for the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates, but it has not eliminated the possibility. Officials at the central bank appear much more sensitive to how price pressures are evolving, with heightened focus on the upcoming inflation report. Fed officials have maintained for months that the labor market is not a primary driver of inflation. Instead, they point to surging energy prices because of the war with Iran and other supply-related shocks. The jobs report showed slower hiring and a tick-up in unemployment, but wage growth remained elevated, a mixed picture that leaves the Fed's September meeting very much in play. The central bank's 2% inflation target has been overshot for 5 years, and officials are determined not to declare victory prematurely. In entertainment, Netflix, still looking for this year's blockbuster, paid an actor to spend 3 days inside a billboard on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles to promote an upcoming film. The stunt, a literal live-in advertisement, reflects the streaming giant's summer slump and its hunger for cultural relevance in an increasingly crowded market. Whether a billboard residency translates into subscribers remains to be seen, but it's a measure of how the economics of attention have shifted. The biggest screen in town isn't a movie theater or a TV set, but a social media feed, and Netflix is willing to stage increasingly elaborate spectacles to get a moment of it. In New York City, Mayor Zoran Mamdani announced on Friday that the city is terminating the employment of Haitian city workers who have lost temporary protected status, after a Supreme Court ruling cleared the way for President Trump to end humanitarian protections for Haitian immigrants. Emma Goldberg reports that city officials said at least dozens of workers were affected, but that number could rise to the hundreds. Under the TPS program, more than 350,000 people from Haiti and Syria were allowed to live and work across the United States while their home countries faced humanitarian disasters. The terminations mark a concrete, local consequence of a federal policy shift that has been winding through the courts for years and a test of the city's commitment to its immigrant workforce. Also in New York, reading test scores dropped 6 points for public school children who took the state exams in the spring, nearly erasing the 7-point gain from the previous year. Matthew Hogg reports that the declines were drastic in some grades, a 14-point decrease among third graders, wiping out the previous year's progress. The drop comes after school leaders overhauled literacy instruction, adopting a phonics-based approach meant to address long-standing deficits. The results represent a stark setback in the city's efforts to improve literacy by changing how students learn to read. School leaders have promised a review of the results, but the data will fuel debate over whether the curriculum changes were implemented too quickly, with insufficient teacher training, or whether the previous year's gains were themselves a statistical anomaly. And Mayor Mamdani faces a lawsuit over the rollout of a contentious new tax on high-end second homes, known as Paitsetera. Mihir Javeri reports that a group of homeowners filed suit on Friday arguing that the city mishandled the rollout. The lawsuit claims officials did not sufficiently narrow the pool of properties that might be taxed before publishing a dataset on the Department of Finance's website listing nearly 1 million homes that may be subject to the charge. The city also sent letters to the owners of roughly 17,000 properties informing them they might be taxed, a move the plaintiffs say created confusion and panic. The tax, aimed at wealthy out-of-towners who keep vacant luxury apartments in the city, was a signature campaign promise for Mamdani. Its rocky implementation has given opponents an opening to challenge it in court and in the court of public opinion. On the arts front, this month's streaming picks include Martial Arts Masters, Veteran Snipers, and Dirty Cops. Robert Daniels highlights Mortal Kombat 2, where Carl Urban's Johnny Cage, a washed-up action star, teams with Princess Kitana to compete as Earth's representative against Emperor Shao Kahn. The gravity-defying fight choreography, Daniels writes, is the real star. Also recommended, a sniper thriller, a corrupt cop procedural, and a martial arts epic from Indonesia. At the Edinburgh Fringe, which opens Friday, producer Francesca Moody, the force behind Fleabag, Baby Reindeer, and Weather Girl, has a likely hit with Roleplay, a one-woman show written by and starring Hannah Riley about a fame-seeking podcaster who reinvents herself as a sex influencer. Its entire Fringe run is sold out in advance, and it will move to London this fall with backing from Global Creatures. Alex Marshall, Howman Bearcat, and Gillian Rayfield also flag 8 other shows with buzz or planned runs beyond the Fringe, from a climate change musical to a solo performance about grief and AI. And our critics are talking about 8 new movies this week, including Will Gluck's rom-com One Night Only, set in an alternate universe New York where sex between unmarried people is legal for only 12 hours. The critics' pick is an auteur-driven drama about a filmmaker confronting his past. Other notables include a horror film set in a remote Irish village and a documentary about a forgotten jazz pianist. In books, Claire Carasillo's novel The Responsible Party features a narrator named Claire Carasillo who vapes her way through her wild family history, shipwreck survivors, shameless shenanigans, even murder. Elizabeth Mackenzie, reviewing the book, calls it an extraordinary tale about the project of human existence as an attempt to reverse the follies of the generation before. The metafictional premise, author and protagonist sharing a name, becomes a lens for exploring inheritance, truth, and storytelling itself. For younger readers, Travis Jonker recommends 11 books for fans of Jeff Kinney's Wimpy Kids series, illustrated novels that blend humor, awkwardness, and the texture of childhood. From The Terrible Two to Dork Diaries to newer entries like Catwad and Investigators, the list aims to tide kids over until the next Kinney installment. In food, don't let summer end without making strawberry fluff, peaches and cream cake, and other seasonal desserts that help you make the most of the season's fruit. Simple, nostalgic, and deeply satisfying, the kind of recipes that taste like childhood memories being remade in real time. In wellness, health experts are trying to understand how the foodborne parasite Cyclospora can cause symptoms that come and go, sometimes for weeks. Caroline Hopkins Legaspi and Danny Blum tell the story of Angie Onofre, who thought she'd recovered after a course of antibiotics, only to have the severe diarrhea return with a vengeance 2 weeks later. A second test confirmed the parasite was still in her stool. In the midst of the worst Cyclospora outbreak in years linked to imported produce, doctors are grappling with relapsing cases and the limits of current treatment protocols. The parasite's ability to persist, seemingly dormant, then reactivate, makes it a uniquely frustrating illness for patients and a puzzle for researchers. For travel, Elaine Blusack writes that long-table vineyard dinners in Tuscany, Instagram fantasies dished out under the stars and string lights, are increasingly popular, and it's not too late to book for August or September. The experience combines wine, multi-course meals, and the golden light of an Italian evening into something that feels both curated and spontaneous. And if Africa is on your list, Blusack's Safari Planning Guide covers budgeting, timing, and the importance of a trained guide in remote areas. 98% of people thinking of going on safari, one specialist says, have little to no idea of what they really want, so the first step is figuring that out. In real estate, designer Alex Proba created a colorful cocoon for her daughter in a 3-story house in Portland's Forest Park, with 17-foot-tall windows looking onto the wildlife sanctuary. The playroom features colorful cabinets, collages, and couches, the ultimate fun zone, a far cry from sad beige. And in Rio de Janeiro, 3 homes under $2 million, a Balinese-style house near Tijuca National Park, a 2-level penthouse with views of Corcovado Mountain, and a newly renovated duplex with a pool. Each offers a different slice of one of the world's most dramatic urban landscapes. In fashion, a critic's notebook examines what Justin Trudeau's boyfriend rebrand says about the intersection of politics and entertainment, the way public figures now curate their personal lives as content, and how the line between statesman and celebrity continues to blur. We pause to mark 3 passings. Charles S. Faddis, a former CIA officer who became an outspoken critic of the agency, a leader of the 2020 election denial movement in Pennsylvania, and a frequent guest on Steve Bannon's War Room podcast, died July 25 at 68. Trip Gabriel writes that Faddis spread baseless claims that the 2020 election was stolen and that former President Biden was compromised, claims that found a receptive audience on the far right. Elizabeth Smith, a founding faculty member of Juilliard drama and vocal coach who mentored Kevin Kline, Patti LuPone, Wendell Pierce, and countless others over more than half a century, died July 28 at 91. Sopan Deb notes that Juilliard's drama division, launched in 1968, became among the most prestigious actor training programs in the world, and Smith was there from the beginning, helping students find their voice, quite literally. And Thomas S. Hines, an architectural historian at UCLA whose research and writing did much to cement Los Angeles' reputation as a global center for modernist design in the 20th century, died July 26 at 89. Clay Risen writes that Hines, born in the South and educated in the Midwest, came to Southern California as a young academic and never left, producing seminal works on Richard Neutra, Irving Gill, and the planners who shaped the city's built environment. In the magazine, 3 people explain their decisions to undergo facial plastic surgeries, facelifts, neck lifts, procedures once considered extreme, now just another tool in the cosmetic toolbox. Their stories reflect a cultural shift in how aging, appearance, and agency are understood. David Wallace Wells writes that until recently, attacking civilian energy infrastructure was unacceptable, they used to call it a war crime. But somewhat suddenly, it has become a nearly universal feature of 21st century conflict. Iran has targeted energy infrastructure around the Persian Gulf since the first day of fighting, Ukraine has struck Russian oil refineries, Israel has hit Iranian facilities. The taboo has eroded, and with it, the distinction between military and civilian targets in modern war. And Anthony Bourdain's fans are cult-like in their devotion, but have they misunderstood his message? The essay asks whether the gospel according to Bourdain has been reduced to a set of aesthetic signifiers, the leather jacket, the dive bar, the performative authenticity rather than the harder, quieter ethic of curiosity and humility he actually embodied. Finally, the opinion section. Michelle Cottle argues that Republicans cannot possibly let Congressman Max Miller go on. The allegations of domestic violence demand accountability, not an ethics investigation designed to run out the clock. A guest essay explores a generation on antidepressants searching for the exit, people who feel the drugs block their true emotions but have no guidance on how to taper off. Ivan Krastev and John Guida offer the vertigo theory of Trump 2.0, what it means not to share a consensus political time, to live through revolutionary upheaval without a shared frame of reference. Ezra Klein's AMA tackles listener questions on Peter Thiel, Chris Rufo, and the DSA. Mara Gay travels to Georgia to ask black voters what they want from America and the Democratic Party, with the midterms looming and Senate control potentially hinging on turnout. And Neil Gross argues that college has a political problem, but it's not woke brainwashing, it's that students are self-segregating by ideology, creating campuses where opposing views rarely meet. That's your briefing for Saturday, August 8, 2026. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the next edition of today's headlines from the New York Times.